The next step in developing our lighting and style of the scene is the materials and textures on the object. So that's what we'll cover in this lesson. And also, I will show you various techniques for cleaning up and refining our image so that it looks as good as possible whilst maintaining a reasonable render time. We currently just have one material, which is this shiny material. I'm gonna open this up and call it pillars. Then I will make a copy, call this floor. Once again, just hold Control to drag and click to make a copy. And this last one is going to be called the side details. So for the pillars and the floor, we are going to use these two images as the textures. These were generated in a free app called JSplacement. It just creates this sort of sci-fi paneling type of image. So I will create a separate bonus tutorial where I show you how to use that app. But for this lesson, you can just use the project files. Let's drag both of them into our scene. We can click no for both. Starting with this image, I will go to the color channel and let's copy this shader. Let's go to the pillars and we want to go into the normal map and enable this. And in the texture, let's paste that image here. Now, a normal map does not work on a black and white image. We have to normalize this for the normal channel to understand what's going on. So under texture, let's drop this down and go to effect and normalizer. And then we can open this up, right click this window, and it creates this sort of blue purple normal map. And this is what the normal map can then understand. And if I open this up again, I will change the filter from condensed to Sobel 2x, and the strength I will increase to 100%. This material is currently applied to everything still, so let's make sure we apply the correct materials to each section. So the floor is just the floor. The side detail, that's this landscape and its atom array effect. And then the pillars I will apply to the 4 different pillars. If I were to just render this out now to the picture viewer, the image is very messy, so we need to clean up how this looks. It's because there is just too many reflections being thrown around, and also we have tiled this texture too tightly. We need to expand it to create larger surface details. So let's go in and make those adjustments. If I select these 4 materials all at once, let's change their projection from UV mapping to cubic, and then set the length, hue, and V to 1000 and 1000. So one more 0 there. And once again, if I render this out, the surface detail is now larger, but it's still very fuzzy. That's because of our actual render settings. So if we open these up, in the anti-aliasing, this is going to control how smooth the pixels are rendered. So the idea is you want to have this as high as possible, but not too high that it ends up making your render time too much. So I would change this from the default geometry to best. And let's go for a minimum level of 1:1, max level, lower this to 2:2, and a threshold of just 5%. I will do another preview just to see the difference between the default geometry anti-aliasing setting and the best setting set to 1:1 and 2:2. So it is definitely cleaner than before, but now it's taking longer to render. But we can also bring that render time down and clean up these reflections by changing the following settings. If we open this up again and go to options, we have these ray controls over here which control how many times rays and reflections in the scene are bounced around. By default, it's set to 15 and 5. We don't have any shadows in the scene, so we are not concerned with this right now. But the ray depth, let's lower this to 6, and the reflection depth, let's lower this to 2. And if I re-render, it's going to be faster than before. And also it's going to look cleaner because the reflection bounce cutoff is lower, so the reflections don't continue being thrown around and being bounced around in our frame. So this is the result. This is before and this is after. Now we still have some reflections on the slanted pillars here. These are actually coming from the upright pillars and being thrown onto there. So what we're going to do is go to the upright pillars under render tags, which in older versions of Cinema 4D was just compositing tags. Let's get the compositing tag. And in the tag settings, we're going to go to scene by reflection and turn this off. So that means the upright pillars will now no longer appear in any reflection. So if we do the before and after, instead of reflecting the other pillars, these slanted pillars are now reflecting more of the galaxy. And I think that looks better and cleaner. We can continue to refine this even more by putting some more render tags on the slanted pillars. And I want to exclude the pillars from seeing themselves. So if I go to the exclusion tab, let's just drag this here, go to the next one and do the same. And we'll move on down the list and do this for the upright pillars too, so that when I do another render, this is before and this is after. Now you can see there is once again less reflections being thrown around. So as we just continue to make those refinements, our image is looking cleaner and cleaner. Let's take this one more step. I can see these pillars are reflecting the previous set of pillars and so on. So let me cut that out also. This will actually be done by going to this cloner here, and let's change its instance mode from instance to render instance, which means that it's no longer a real physical object. Rather, we just see it as if it is, but the result of that is if I render, because it's not a real object anymore, it's just a render instance, it will no longer appear in reflections. So that means that these pillars will no longer reflect each other, and I much prefer the style and look of that. Let's do the floor material. I will actually just make a copy of the old pillars material, then go to this image we brought in earlier. I will copy this, go to that copied material, let's call this floor. In the normal channel, I would just do the same thing I did before, just replace this image though with our other generated texture. Let's apply this to the floor and remove the old one. Let me look out of this camera. Let's get closer here. And on the floor, we will change the projection from UV mapping to cubic. And let's set the length for V and U to 250 just to tile that a bit larger again. Let's look through our camera and do another preview. That's before and that's after. Great. From here on, we're just going to make some refinements to all the materials at once because they're essentially the same material. We set them up the same, which means we can select all three at once. And in the reflectance channel, I just want to make everything brighter and more reflective. The first layer of reflection we have, I'm going to change the attenuation to additive, which is just a bit brighter. Lower the reflection to, let's say, 50%. It's because we're going to add another layer actually, and add this layer on top of the original reflection. Let's set the roughness down to 0, specular strength to 0, attenuation to additive, and make sure that it's adding on top of the previous layer. And then under layer color, I'm gonna enable the Fresnel effect under texture. Let's go to Fresnel, and it makes the reflection more intense on a shallower angle. But if you're looking at an object dead on, it will be less reflective there, but more reflective on the edges. And this creates a very interesting effect where, you know, the edges of our objects will be way more reflective. One other change I will do is in the luminance channel of our galaxy. Let's open up this filter. I will enable the clipping and bring down the high clip to about 65% just to make this brighter. And now if I run another preview render, we can see the difference. Generally just more dramatic looking, more contrasty, and the highlights are stronger. So as you can see, the lighting really in the scene is not technically lighting, it's just reflections and a bright galaxy image out there in the distance. And that's how we achieve the look and style of this particular visual. One other change I might do here is to the side details. I'm gonna start by bringing them in just a bit. Let's set the size to, let's say, 1900 on the cloner X size. That's gonna bunch them inward just a bit. And then the landscape itself, I want it to be taller. So in the example, I was using a seed value of 7. That gave me a different randomly generated looking landscape, which had these higher peaks, and I just preferred the look of that. And we could also go to the height, let's say 350, just to make those even taller. Okay, and we have now finished the project in Cinema 4D.